1. Megalodon. Let's talk about the undisputed king of the prehistoric oceans. If you were swimming in the warm coastal waters around the globe millions of years ago, you would be sharing the surf with this absolute titan. They thrived in almost every ocean, preferring the sunlit, nutrient-rich zones. If humans had built cities back then, these massive predators would be cruising right past the piers, harbors, and beaches where you build sandcastles today. You would literally see their enormous shadows from your coastal hotel balcony. Size-wise, the sheer numbers do not do it justice. Let's look at the teeth. A single tooth was the exact size of your modern smartphone, incredibly thick, deeply serrated, and shockingly heavy. The entire shark itself was the length of a modern bowling alley. Imagine standing at the foul line and looking all the way down to the pins. That entire distance is pure, solid muscle, cartilage, and predatory perfection wrapped in rough, slate-gray skin. They were bulky, battle-scarred, and terrifyingly thick. The real power is its thermal regulation. You see, most sharks are completely cold-blooded, entirely at the mercy of the ocean's ambient temperature. Not this beast. It could actively heat its own blood, keeping its massive eyes and brain incredibly warm. This gave it crystal-clear, high-speed vision and cognitive processing even in cold, murky depths where other animals became totally sluggish. Now, if a tiny, newly hatched pup somehow bumped into your leg today, it might just leave a rough scrape on your skin. It is kind of like a wasp's sting, simply nothing that will land you in hospital. For us, just local pain and redness. But for its actual prey, the giant, blubber-rich whales of the Miocene epoch, the bite was an apocalyptic event. When it hunts, it does not just randomly bite, it mathematically dismantles its prey. It stalks from the dark depths below, completely invisible to the whale breathing at the surface. It waits. It detects the rhythmic splashing. Then, it strikes with the force of a freight train, deliberately targeting the whale's flippers and tail. It purposefully bites off the steering mechanisms so the prey cannot dive or escape. Then, it just circles, watching patiently as the victim tires out. Here is the weirdest part. The mothers used literal prehistoric nurseries. They would drop their babies in shallow, predator-free coastal waters, like a biological daycare. But these babies were born hungry. Before they even left the shallow reefs, these giant pups would often cannibalize each other, ensuring only the absolute most ruthless survive to hit the open ocean. What comes next is even more reptilian, fiercely territorial, and built to rule the shallow coastal seas. 2. Mosasaurus. Let's talk about the absolute apex nightmare of the late Cretaceous waters. This marine reptile preferred shallow, warm inland seas and thrived right along the sunlit coastlines. If you lived back then, these creatures would literally be hunting in the exact same shallow bays and river mouths where you might park a modern fishing boat. They were constantly patrolling the waters near land, completely unafraid of anything in their environment. Size and appearance-wise, you need to picture something incredibly massive. The sheer bulk of this animal was roughly the size of an articulated city bus. Its scales were dark and leathery, providing excellent camouflage against the dark seabed. If you looked closely at its face, each eye was the exact size of a large grapefruit, constantly scanning the murky water. Its teeth were thick and conical, perfectly matching the size and shape of standard kitchen knives, jutting out of jaws that could crush bone effortlessly. Surprisingly, the power is not just its sheer size, but its terrifying double-hinged jaw. Just like a modern snake, this ocean titan could unhinge its massive jaws to swallow enormous prey entirely whole. It did not have to waste time chewing. It could simply open its mouth to an impossible, physics-defying angle and inhale food in one swift, horrifying gulp. Now, if a tiny juvenile one somehow gave you a warning nip, it would honestly be kind of like a wasp's sting. It would just be a sharp poke, absolutely nothing that will land you in hospital. For us, just local pain and redness. But what it does to its actual prey is the stuff of absolute nightmares. When it hunts, it chases its victims down with explosive bursts of speed. It waits in the murky shadows near the seabed, its dark skin blending perfectly. It detects a plesiosaur swimming above. Then, it strikes, propelling its massive bus-sized body upward like a biological torpedo. It slams into the prey, locking those kitchen knife teeth into flesh, and brutally thrashes its heavy head side to side to rip chunks of meat before swallowing the remains whole. Here is the weirdest part about this monster. They were brutally aggressive toward their own kind. Paleontologists have found skulls of these beasts covered in massive, horrific bite marks from other rival males. But incredibly, these deep bone wounds actually healed. They would routinely survive having their faces crushed by other bus-sized rivals just to secure mating rights in the shallow bays. What comes next is a silent, stalking phantom that uses a totally different way of tracking its victims through the dark, cold depths of the ocean. 3. Liopleurodon. Let's talk about the silent, stalking phantom of the Jurassic seas. This massive marine reptile lived in the open ocean and deep channels separating prehistoric island chains, primarily around what is now modern-day Europe. If humans had oceanic shipping lanes back then, these stealthy beasts would be silently gliding hundreds of feet beneath our cargo ships, perfectly at home in the dark, open water where the light begins to fade. To understand its size, imagine a large commercial delivery van. That is the sheer bulk and length of this creature's barrel-shaped body. It had 4 massive flippers and a skull that was terrifyingly huge, making up nearly a fifth of its entire body length. Its nostrils alone were the exact size of large dinner plates. The skin was likely counter-shaded, dark on top and light underneath, making it completely invisible whether you look down into the abyss or up toward the blinding sun. The real power is its directional smelling capability underwater. Water flowed continuously through those dinner plate nostrils as it swam, allowing it to literally smell in 3-dimensional stereo. It could track exactly where a scent was coming from, sensing blood or fear from miles away and knowing the precise direction and distance to the target without ever needing to see it. If a newborn one happened to graze your leg in the water, it would just feel like a rough scratch. It is kind of like a wasp's sting, absolutely nothing that will land you in hospital. For us, just local pain and redness. But to its actual prey, this precision targeting meant absolute and certain doom. When it hunts, it waits completely motionless in the pitch-black shadows below a busy coral reef or a school of giant fish. It detects the scent trail in the water. It angles its massive van-sized body upwards. Then, it uses all 4 enormous flippers to burst forward with a sudden, horrifying acceleration. It strikes violently, using its massive jaws to instantly crush the spine of its victim before they even realize they are being hunted. The most weird and unexpected behavior is exactly how those giant flippers worked. Unlike modern fish that use their tails to swim, this giant reptile moved through the water using a unique underwater flying motion. It essentially flapped its 4 giant flippers like a gigantic, terrifying underwater bird, giving it unmatched maneuverability to twist and spin on a dime, defying the physics of its massive bulk. What comes next is even weirder, sporting an impossibly long neck that defies all biological logic and reason. For Plesiosaurus. Let's talk about the bizarre, long-necked enigma of the ancient coastlines. This creature lived in the shallow marine environments and coastal waters of prehistoric Europe, preferring areas with hidden underwater caves and steep drop-offs. If humans shared the world with them, you would easily spot these strange animals hunting right near the rocky sea cliffs, perhaps even snatching fish directly beneath the busy wooden docks of a coastal fishing village. When visualizing its size, picture a large, solid oak dining table. That is roughly the size of its compact, turtle-like body. But protruding from that body was a wildly long, snake-like neck that was as thick as a heavy-duty garden hose. It had a tiny, almost delicate head equipped with needle-like teeth, and its skin was likely smooth and hydrodynamic, perfectly evolved for slipping effortlessly through the coastal currents. Surprisingly, the power is the incredible flexibility and speed of that bizarre neck. While the heavy, table-sized body moved slowly and steadily through the water, the neck could whip around with blinding speed, darting in every possible direction to snatch evasive prey out of small crevices that the main body could never fit into. If one accidentally nipped your finger, the tiny needle teeth would barely pierce the skin. It is kind of like a wasp's sting, leaving a small mark but nothing that will land you in hospital. For us, just local pain and redness. But for the schools of slippery prehistoric fish it preyed upon, those needle teeth acted as an inescapable, lethal cage. When it hunts, it does not chase. It slowly paddles its body near a massive, swirling school of fish. It waits. Then, it sweeps its tiny head back and forth through the school, snapping its jaws shut in a rapid-fire rhythm. It strikes so quickly that the fish do not even register the movement of the tiny head until they are already trapped within the interlocking cage of its teeth, completely swallowed whole. The most unexpected behavior is what we have found inside their fossilized stomachs. To counteract the buoyancy of their air-filled lungs and massive bodies, they intentionally swallowed heavy, smooth rocks. They essentially carried a belly full of literal ballast stones, allowing them to hover perfectly still in the water column without floating to the surface, making them the perfect, stable hunting platform. 5. Ichthyosaurus. Let's talk about the ultimate speed demon of the prehistoric open ocean. This incredible marine reptile completely abandoned the land, living entirely in the vast, deep oceanic stretches across the globe. If we were sailing the seas today, these magnificent, terrifyingly fast creatures would be leaping from the bow wakes of our massive cruise ships, exactly like modern dolphins do, playfully but lethally pacing our fastest vessels. To grasp its size, imagine a standard living room sofa. That is the exact length and bulk of this incredibly streamlined, torpedo-shaped predator. Its skin was flawlessly smooth and dolphin-like, perfectly contoured to eliminate water drag. But the most striking visual feature was its eyes. Each eye was literally the size of a large vinyl record, dominating its skull and giving it a permanent, unblinking, ghostly stare. The real power is those massive eyes, granting it unparalleled deep-sea night vision. While other predators were forced to hunt in the sunlit shallows, this creature could dive deep down into the crushing, pitch-black abyss where light simply ceases to exist. Its giant eyes gathered every single microscopic photon of bioluminescence, allowing it to see perfectly in a world of absolute, crushing darkness. Now, if you were swimming and a baby one accidentally bumped into you at high speed, it would just feel like a mild bruise. It is kind of like a wasp's sting, absolutely nothing that will land you in hospital. For us, just local pain and redness. But for the soft-bodied deep-sea squids it hunted, that speed was an unavoidable death sentence. When it hunts, it relies on sheer, unadulterated velocity. It dives deep into the inky blackness. It detects the faint, glowing outlines of a giant squid school. It chases them down at speeds exceeding 40 miles per hour, slicing through the freezing water like a biological missile. It strikes, clamping its long, narrow beak shut on the slippery squid, using its hundreds of tiny, sharp teeth to grip the thrashing prey securely. The weirdest and most unexpected behavior is how they adapted to their fully aquatic lifestyle. Unlike sea turtles that must clumsily crawl onto the beach to lay eggs, these reptiles completely severed their ties to the land. They evolved to give live birth directly underwater. Fossil evidence has captured the exact, dramatic moment of a mother giving birth tail-first in the open ocean, ensuring the baby did not drown before reaching the surface for its first breath. What comes next is even older, heavily armored, and completely lacks traditional teeth, acting like a literal underwater tank. 6. Dunkleosteus. Let's talk about the heavily armored, nightmare tank of the Devonian period. This terrifying prehistoric fish lived in the warm, shallow inland seas that once covered much of what is now North America. If humans existed during its reign, you would not want to take a casual dip in the coastal bays, because this brutal, armored titan constantly patrolled the murky nearshore environments right where people would typically swim. When you picture its size, think of a massive commercial U-Haul truck. That represents the terrifying bulk and sheer mass of this ancient monster. The front half of its body was entirely encased in thick, impenetrable bone armor. This armor plating was literally the thickness of a thick hardback book, shielding its head and gills from any counterattacks. Its skin was tough, dark, and perfectly suited for the muddy, low-visibility coastal waters it dominated. Surprisingly, the power is its self-sharpening bone blades. This monster did not actually have teeth. Instead, the heavy armor plates of its skull extended into massive, razor-sharp, bony shears. Every single time the creature opened and closed its mouth, these thick bone plates would grind against each other, continuously honing and sharpening themselves to a microscopic, deadly edge. If a tiny juvenile somehow scraped against you in the surf, it would just cause a minor cut. It is kind of like a wasp's sting, simply nothing that will land you in hospital. For us, just local pain and redness. But to its prey, which consisted of other heavily armored ancient fish and primitive sharks, those bone shears were an instantaneous guillotine. When it hunts, it does not just bite, it literally manipulates the physics of water. It waits in the murky gloom near the muddy seafloor. It detects a heavily armored target drifting by. Then, it strikes by opening its massive jaws in just 1/50th of a second. This incredibly rapid expansion creates a sudden, massive underwater vacuum. The explosive suction physically rips the prey backward, dragging them helplessly into the crushing bone shears before they can even attempt to swim away. The weirdest behavior revolves around its digestion. Because it constantly swallowed extremely tough, heavily armored prey whole, its stomach simply could not process the thick bone and shell. Instead of digesting it, the beast would routinely regurgitate perfectly clean, tightly packed bundles of semi-digested bones and armor, leaving strange, fossilized biological scrap metals scattered all across the prehistoric seafloor. What comes next is an absolute titan with a bite force that breaks all the rules of biology. 7. Kronosaurus. Let's talk about the ultimate, bone-crushing apex predator of the early Cretaceous period. This terrifying marine reptile lived primarily in the vast, cold inland sea that once divided the continent of Australia. If humanity had colonized those shores, these absolute monsters would be the undisputed rulers of the shipping channels, hunting massive prey right alongside the frigid coastal cliffs and deep oceanic trenches. Size-wise, you need to imagine a standard shipping container. That is the exact length and sheer, immovable mass of this creature's heavily muscled body. Its head was completely disproportionate to its body, measuring over 9 feet long alone. Inside that massive skull were terrifying, robust teeth that were the exact size and shape of ripe bananas. Yes, thick, blunt, heavily ridged bananas made of solid enamel. The real power is its incomprehensible, crushing bite force. While other predators relied on sharp teeth to slice flesh, this beast was built purely for blunt force destruction. Its jaw muscles were so incredibly dense and heavily anchored to its skull that it could crush the thickest armor in the ocean with the ease of a hydraulic press crushing a soda can. If you somehow got a tiny nip from a newly hatched baby, it would just be a blunt pinch. It is kind of like a wasp's sting, absolutely nothing that will land you in hospital. For us, just local pain and redness. But for the giant prehistoric sea turtles and armored squids it hunted, that crushing pressure meant instant, catastrophic structural failure. When it hunts, it actively patrols the open water column, seeking out the most heavily armored prey available. It detects the slow, rhythmic paddling of a giant, car-sized sea turtle. It chases the turtle down with powerful strokes of its 4 massive flippers. It strikes from below, wrapping those banana-sized teeth around the thickest part of the shell, and simply clenches its jaw, shattering the impenetrable armor into thousands of pieces in a single, devastating crunch. Here is the most weird and unexpected behavior of this giant. Despite being a highly active apex predator, scientists believe that because of its massive bulk and dense bone structure, it would frequently rest by simply floating motionlessly near the surface. It essentially slept like a massive, terrifying biological log, completely exposed to the sun and air, utterly confident that absolutely nothing in the ocean was brave enough to attack it while it rested. What comes next is our final terror, equipped with a built-in biological battering ram to completely destroy its victims. 8. Tylosaurus. Let's talk about the ruthless, deep-diving battering ram of the late Cretaceous. This gigantic mosasaur ruled the western interior seaway, a massive, shallow ocean that once completely split North America in half. If you were living in what is now Kansas or Nebraska back then, you would be looking out over a warm, tropical sea entirely dominated by this hyper-aggressive, constantly hunting apex predator. When visualizing its immense size, think of a large wooden telephone pole. That is the exact length of this slender, highly muscular, serpentine sea monster. Its body was sleek and heavily scaled, optimized for explosive bursts of speed. Its snout was incredibly unique, extending far past its front teeth in a massive, solid cylinder of bone exactly the size and shape of a heavy wooden baseball bat. The real power is that bizarre, weaponized snout. It was not meant for biting. It was a heavily reinforced, biological battering ram. The solid bone projection at the front of its face was completely fused and incredibly dense, allowing the creature to use its entire telephone pole-sized body weight as a high-speed projectile weapon without breaking its own skull. If a tiny baby one gently bumped into your shin, it would just feel like a dull knock. It is kind of like a wasp's sting, totally nothing that will land you in hospital. For us, just local pain and redness. But to its massive prey, a full-speed impact from an adult was absolutely devastating. When it hunts, it relies on shock and awe. It waits in the darker, deeper waters, looking upward for silhouetted prey. It detects a large prehistoric seabird or a smaller marine reptile at the surface. Then, it propels itself upward at maximum velocity. It strikes not by biting, but by violently ramming its bat-like snout directly into the soft underbelly of the target, instantly stunning them, shattering ribs, and rupturing organs before casually opening its jaws to swallow the paralyzed victim. The most weird and unexpected behavior is its sheer, indiscriminate gluttony. Fossilized stomach contents of this monster are absolutely legendary. They did not just eat one type of prey, they ate literally everything. Paleontologists have found perfectly preserved remains of prehistoric birds, giant flightless diving birds, smaller mosasaurs, and even fully grown prehistoric sharks, all swallowed entirely whole and stacked neatly inside its massive, bottomless stomach. This creature was essentially the absolute garbage disposal of the ancient ocean, completely unfazed by the sharp beaks or serrated teeth of its victims, proving that absolutely nothing was safe from its relentless hunger.